Hello everybody and welcome back to another exclusive video for Novos. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Queasy's run through an NA East Cash Cup. Now, looking at high-elo gameplay is very important in order for you to improve. Obviously we have a bunch and variety of different tournaments that you can play throughout different regions. We see a lot of people do super well on cross-region sort of gameplays, Queasy being one of them. My man has qualified multiple solo cash cups multiple times on different regions on the same week, so he's a little bit ridiculous with the way that he plays. Now, remember, this footage is slightly outdated because Queasy still has the 80 charges of his Spider-Man. However, it doesn't really change too much in his integral playstyle, which is important to mention. So let's hop into it and start off with the opens portion of the Cash Cup. Now, Queasy lands over towards the north of Condo Canyon, and what that means is he basically relies on his Spider-Man gauntlet in order to progress throughout the mid and the late game. Now, obviously, it's very important in solos, at least on any region, to use any sort of movement that you can, and that's what he does. He abuses the hell out of it because it's very important. Now, going into a fight on a different region is really important to think about because there's two major things you need to think about. One, you need to be thinking about your ping. Obviously, you're never going to be able to take a wall unless it's against another EU player or it's against an absolute bot. And more than likely, even an absolute bot in solo cash cups will be able to hold a wall against you and realize that's an important thing to do. So most of the time, you gotta play it very patiently, and that's what Queasy does a lot of the time. Like in that example there, he baits out the pickaxe swing, forces that player to edit, and then instantly switches back to his shotgun in order to shoot. Now, more than likely, you never really want to be using your pickaxe in solo cash cups because you're never going to be able to get the wall, right? So what you want to be focusing a lot on is AR shooting and using your weapons in order to take walls or to pressure walls. You don't ever want to be caught lacking without a gun in your hand because of the high ping difference. You're just not going to be able to pull out your weapon quicker than the enemy. Therefore, they will always have an advantage. Now, this game itself wasn't that interesting from the perspective from mid-game fights because Queasy just didn't really take too many fights in the mid-game. As we progress through towards half and half, we see Queasy up to 3 eliminations already, which is what we got from the early game fights, and already has 83 builds. He's not in the best spot right now, but he's forcing the issue, right? He knows that in order for him to progress and to succeed in this game, he's going to need to find an impact frag, which he does find now 100 materials plus extra mats on this side as well, and that should be able to fuel him up going towards that first moving in this game. Now, I want to quickly look at his loadout real quick to take a look at what he sort of plays with. So he plays with shotgun, which is pretty obvious because SMG on high ping is a little bit tough to play as well. You can use it for drop downs like this initially, and it should get you some free eliminations as he does there. Good piece control. Obviously very hard to emulate because Queasy is such a good player, but in that situation, that high fire rate SMG was worthwhile for him to get that wall. There's more chance of you getting bleed through damage anyways. Again, gets a player caught off guard, and that's a free elimination for him. But it's important to always run some sort of SMG over an MK7 because even though you have higher ping, the bleed through rate of the bullets is still very high. You should be able to get damage through a wall regardless of the ping because of the high fire rate. So that's pretty easy for him. Other than that, in his inventory, Spider-Man as always, minis, which is very important, and Chug Splash. And I think Chug Splash are pretty integral in how you sort of play solo cash cups now as well. If you don't have movement, if you don't have the ability to recycle pads, you can use those as white heals, and every single placement point counts. It's very important to keep those. Now, going into this first moving, Queasy with 134 builds in total is not going to play aggressive at all because he doesn't need an impact frag, and that's key and integral in realizing what you need to do in solo. It's just knowing when you need to go aggressive and when you don't. We saw him go aggressive into half and half because he only had about 70 builds in total, meaning that the game more than likely would have been very scuffed to try to find an impact frag going into first moving. It's easier to find an impact frag in static zones, so half and half or fourth zone, jumping into boxes because it's a lot more coordinated and you're able to get eliminations quicker that way rather than trying to find elimination in a moving zone situation where obviously you're not going to be able to get the wall, so you don't have the time and the luxury to go for something for free. Going on to that, you never really want to try to go for eliminations into first moving or second moving because it's just too difficult. You can try to go for hold kills, so using Spider-Man to go front side of zone and get eliminations, but if you try to go for box fighting in these late game situations, try to jump in the box with SMGs, it's very tough for you. And so far, Queasy in this game hasn't really looked for anything, right? He's just played endgame pretty solidly, just looked for Spider-Man box, and that's pretty standard in solo cash cups. So playing it passively and just playing for endgame is just so vital in order to qualify towards the second round. And that's exactly what Queasy did. Now moving over towards the finals of the NA East solo cash cup. Queasy has a very similar strategy for his off spawn, lands right on top of that Spider-Man, goes over towards the north side, and then loots out towards gas station side and gets all of his loot this way. Mid game in solo cash cup finals is going to be very similar. You're going to be playing pretty much passively, but you want to be avoiding as many people as possible whilst also getting Storm Surge. Now that's a must. Those two sound very opposite basically because you need to get Storm Surge but also avoid people. It is very difficult as a hyping player in order to do that. So what you can do in a lot of the situation is sort of play rat strats, what Queasy tried to do there. You know, hide inside of buildings, trying to find good pumps on players, try to hide in bushes and try to find opportunities where you're not easily going to be able to get W keyed. And that's your biggest risk in solo cash cup finals against very good players and pro players, is getting W keyed. Because if these players are trying to catch up, remember the points format is very elimination heavy. So a lot of these players are going to be trying to play aggressively early on, aggressively in sort of halfway through the tournament in order to, you know, catch up in terms of elimination points. So what you want to be doing a lot of the time is you want to be playing sort of dead side, but it's going to be tough for you to always play dead side, because if you do play dead side fully, then that gives you better opportunities to get W keyed as well. And what I mean by that is basically, good players in solo cash cups, they want to W key on dead side. And why do they want to do that? Well, basically they want to avoid third parties. So hiding all the way towards his right side here might be, you know, it might feel safe in an open situation, but in a final situation, hiding over here, you're going to find maybe good and aggressive players that are trying to W key someone over here and take an edge zone fight, because they're very confident in their ability to get an elimination for free there. And they're not going to have the risk of any third party. They're able to refarm and be safe in this fight as well. So you got to be careful when you're playing in these edge zone spots, because if you play too much of a dead side on high elo, then you're just going to get W keyed by other players. One of the most important things on high ping, and it's also applicable to low ping, but it's not as prevalent, is being able to find spots to reform. Because you're going to be playing a very, very passive sort of playstyle going into late game, you want to maximize the amount of materials that you have going into that late game. So you always want to be finding spots for you to reform. Queasy always goes box to box on top of brick buildings. As we see here, his box are very near all of these big rocks. He's able to reform for brick. So what you want to be thinking about very early on is, how can I maximize my metal? And after maximizing my metal, I'm never going to be using a metal build ever again until that third and fourth zone, more than likely. So you're basically boxed up on brick the entire time. So you need to be pre-planning and thinking about what your rotate's going to be going into that late game. The more central that you play in solos, the harder it is for you to reform. And you have to think about this logically. If you're over here, you're surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different teams. And what that basically means is you're never going to find an opportunity to reform the open. You're only going to be limited to the space that you have over here. Whereas if you play a lot more edge and a lot more dead side, in this situation, if Queasy has to move from here to here, for example, he's able to use brick all the way this way, reform, and then find an edge zone dead side spot where he's able to reform for free without getting shot at by other players. You see that there's no one around them, basically meaning that he can reform for free regardless of where he has to go. And that's very, very important in solos, is just finding those reform spots and maximizing the amount of materials that you have going into that first moving zone, because it's a massive difference. Having 60 builds going to first moving compared to 100 plus is the difference between you having to find a refresh in 7th moving zone or 8th moving zone, which could be the difference of 5 to 10 points at one time. Skipping over towards half and half, we see Queasy get into this late game with 100 builds. So, you know, pretty standard considering we had to go all the way from this bottom right towards Coney Crossroads. It's not too bad of a situation for him. He still has his Spider-Man gauntlets. And here is what we saw similar to in the opens again, white heals. Now, this is very, very integral to any sort of playstyle, but especially in high elo, is if you can farm out your placement points with white heals, it's so important. You're able to reuse pads, you're able to find eliminations on backside of zone, which are very easy because, you know, you'll be able to catch people off guard, and you can also make some sneaky high ground plays with it as well. Notice how Queasy sees a player right in front of him. He has 60 builds in total, and he doesn't actually go that aggressively on this player, right? I believe it wasn't an EU, he would have 100% gone for this elimination on 60 builds, but here, he's just going to maximize as many placement points as he can. He's not going to be playing fully for the win because he knows it's just not consistent enough. He can find other better opportunities like this one where he catches the player off guard for free but isn't able to get the elimination. In that situation prior, he doesn't need to go for it crazy right now because he still has 70 charges on his med mist, he still has 50 builds and so many charges on the Spider-Man gauntlets as well, so he can essentially make it into that 9th moving zone for free with his current loadout without having to go that aggressively. Going into 30 builds now Queasy's going to start to look a little bit more aggressively, trying to rat through some of old builds and maybe catch someone off guard and backside of zone, because one Siphon elimination is good as well, and that's going to be able to get him that necessary build in order to go through. Notice now how he hasn't gone towards using a Spider-Man going to 8th moving zone. Too unreliable, it's very difficult, and this is where the med mist comes into action, and this is where it's do or die. He's able to med mist, sort of sneak towards backside of zone, towards low ground, and here you can find a quick elimination if he gets lucky on a play that's very scuffed, always looking towards low ground, towards mid ground, and there you go, finds a quick play in this box, and that's the opportunity you can find by playing passively on the backside of zone and then progressing towards front side. He gets now a Siphon elimination, 44 builds, and that's more than enough. He's not going to be aggressing anymore. Unfortunately though, he gets a player into his box, but that's fine. But he's just going to be avoiding fights now. And he's already made 9th moving zone just with one elimination. So you have to remember, he had 90 builds going to first moving. And he got to 9th moving zone with 23 builds now and 1 elimination. So just being able to progressively play that way, that passively, is so important. Again, he doesn't try to hold a wall against that player. Just recognizes that he's not going to be able to hold it. Gets a timing shot through. Gets elimination. And finds himself another med mist with more builds and Siphon builds. And that should get him at least top 5 now going into this final moving zone. Very, very passive and good understanding of what he can and can't do into that late game. Just focusing on the timing shot. And now he's just going to be farming placement. There you go, top 5. And that's a very good game for Queasy now. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to check out all the other content on novos.gg. Playing high-elo isn't that difficult. It just requires a little bit of patience. Have yourself a good one, guys. Goodbye.